When criticized about the tactic, Syria would deny using poison gas and insist absurdly that the rebels were bombing their own neighborhoods. Then Russian officials would simply parrot the claim while in their private offices in New York, UN officials shook their heads and lamented their inability to do anything about the attacks. Power thought the restriction was ridiculous and said so in meetings with UN counterparts and with White House colleagues. If there's clear evidence of guilt, why not say it publicly? The UN doesn't have a mandate, Power was repeatedly told. Well, that should be a conversation starter, she replied one day. What we at the United Nations do is create mandates. The problem, of course, was Russia, but here Power had an unexpected ally. The head of Russia's UN delegation was a veteran diplomat named Vitaly Cherkin, the Security Council's longest serving ambassador and a forceful and frequently caustic defender of the Kremlin's policies in Syria. A former child actor, he had served as a Russian diplomat since the 1970s and possessed a keen understanding of American politics and culture from a long stint in the Soviet Union's embassy in Washington in the 1980s. He had a ruddy complexion, a thinning mane of cottony hair, and a disposition that shifted easily from wryly cheerful to fiercely combative. By the summer of 2015, the 63-year-old Muscovite was also Power's good friend. When she started the UN job, Power's predecessor, Susan Rice, encouraged her to cultivate a good working relationship with her Russian counterpart. He will drive you crazy, Rice had said of Churkin, but you will need each other. Power did so, and the two were soon frequent companions at lunches and cocktail hours, and over long, candid conversations in their respective missions in New York. On many a week, as Power would later say, she spent more time with Cherkin than with her own family. A camaraderie developed over time, and Power began to perceive Cherkin as more than just a skillful diplomat who faithfully advanced his government's policies in his own way, which usually meant working behind the scenes. Cherkin was someone who liked to get things done. Vitali didn't go to work in the morning looking to block things, Power said. He wasn't a person who liked vetoing resolutions. Despite his country's record of protecting and empowering Assad, Cherkin in private moments could appear genuinely sympathetic about the suffering of ordinary Syrians, and he was sensitive to the public view of Moscow as an accomplice to genocide. Now in Ukraine, what are they doing? He didn't want to be the bad guy all the time, she said. Sensing an opportunity with her new friend, Power began to push the idea of an international panel of experts that would objectively examine the evidence surrounding chemical attacks in Syria and, whenever possible, render a judgment about who was responsible for the crime. If Russia truly believed that Assad was innocent and that all the gas attacks were carried out exclusively by jihadists and other rebels, why not allow the exculpatory evidence to be presented to the whole world? What is there to lose? She asked. At the White House, Power was advised to save her breath. Even some Obama advisers were not persuaded that chlorine was truly a chemical weapon. You'll never get the Russians to agree, she was repeatedly told. But in their private conversations, Cherkin seemed surprisingly open to the idea, or at least unwilling to rule it out. Power wondered whether the Russians were growing weary of the chlorine attacks, which, after all, sullied the diplomatic victory they had achieved in securing the deal to eliminate Syria's stockpile. Could the mere threat of exposure and public shaming lead the culprits to abandon the tactic? If you want to deter, then why don't we do this together? Power asked Cherkin one day. Why don't we try to create something? Cherkin paused, considering. The ruddy face brightened. Why not? He said. Over the following weeks, the two sat together to draw up an outline for the new investigative panel. It would again be jointly run by the United Nations and the OPCW, and it would have a 1 year mandate to study evidence collected after previous attacks to see if it was possible at last to identify a guilty party. The results would be presented to the UN Security Council, where Russia could always cast its veto to prevent any real harm from befalling its Syrian ally. But the reports themselves would be public, and everyone would know what the investigators had found. Power never fully understood why the Russians went along with the plan or knew what kinds of contortions Cherkin put himself through to win the Kremlin's approval. The Russians' own aides seemed wary of the proposal, so much so that the two ambassadors sent their deputies out of the room when negotiating the most delicate parts of the agreement. The staff is not going to be able to do this, Cherkin explained. It's Samantha and Vitaly. By early August, they had finished. On August 7, the Security Council unanimously approved the creation of the OPCW/UN Joint Investigative Mechanism, soon known simply as the JIM.